Hello, welcome to my channel. This is our first live reading, Tolkien's The Hobbit. I love Tolkien, one of my favorite authors of fantasy. Consider him the god of fantasy. So we're gonna start in the beginning, but first I want to show some good old maps and art. So, it says, here of old was Thrain, king under the mountain. And then it says, the desolation of Smaug. In Asgoth upon the long lake dwell men. West lies Mirkwood the great, there of spiders. Yeah, it's hard to read because it's kind of fancy the way it is, but I'm a map girly. I love maps. I really love maps. Okay, let's start with chapter 1. An unexpected party. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that meant comfort. It had a perfectly round door like a porthole, painted green with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-like shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with paneled walls and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight in the side of the hill, as all the people for many miles round called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another. No going upstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, celebratory pantries, lots of those. Wardrobes, he had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-handed side going in, for those were the only ones to have windows, deep-set round windows looking over the garden and meadows beyond, sloping down to the river. The hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighborhood of the hill for a time of the mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell the Baggins would say on any questions without the bother of asking him. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without bothering to ask him. This is a story of how Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have had lost the neighbor's respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit, was it a hobbit? What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays since they have been rare and shy of big people, as they call us. I guess I'm a big people, yeah. They are, or were, a little people about half our height and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic about them except the ordinary everyday sort, which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large stupid folk like you and me come bumbling along, making a noise like elephants which they hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress with bright colors, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes because their feet grow naturally leathery soles, and thick, warm brown hair like stuff on their heads, which is curly, have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep, fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now, you know enough to go with, as I was saying, the mother of the hobbit of Bilbo Baggins, that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the three remarkable daughters of Old Took. head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran off at the foot of the hill. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestor must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was something not entirely hobbit-like about them, and once in a while members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared and the family hushed it up, but the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses. Though they were undoubtedly richer, not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures after she became Miss Bungo Baggins. Bungo was that Bilbo's father built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money that was to be found either under the hill or over the hill or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of the silent and comfortable father, got something quite bit queer in his makeup from the Took side, something that only waited for the chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown up. After about 50 years or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have just described for you, until he had, in fact, apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance one morning long ago in the quiet of the world, where there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at the door after breakfast smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed, Gandalf came by. Gandalf! If you had heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard every little of all there is to hear, you would have been prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place whenever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend Old Took died. In fact, all the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on business of his own since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unexpected Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, a silver scarf over which his long white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining and the grass was very green, but Gandalf looked at him from under long bushy eyebrows and stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning, or that it is morning to be good on?" "Gandalf, you wizard." "All of them at once," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out the doors. Into the bargain, if you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine." "There's no hurry. We have all the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on the seat by his door, crossed his legs, blew out a beautiful gray ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I'm looking for someone to share an adventure that I am arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone." "I should think so. In these parts, we are plain quiet folk and have no use for adventures, nasty, disturbing, and uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. I think what anybody sees in them. I can't think of what anybody sees in them." Lost my place, sorry. Said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another, even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He decided that he was not quite his sort and wanted him to go away, but the old man did not move. He stood there leaning on his stick and gazed at the hobbits without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and said, and even a little cross, "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." But by this he meant that the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things you do use good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now you meant mean that you want to get rid of me, and that won't be good till I move off. Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name. Yes, yes, my dear sir, and I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be good morning by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons to the door. Buttons to the door. Gandalf, Gandalf, good gracious me, not the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered, not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at party about dragons and goblins and giants, and the rescue of the princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons, not the man that used to make such a particularly excellent fireworks. I remember those. Old Took used to have them on the midsummer's eve. Splendid. They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons and laburnums of the fire and hanging in the twisting all evening. Twilight all evening. You will notice already that Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe. Also that he was very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on, not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lassies going off into the blue for mad adventures, anything from climbing trees to visiting elves, sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quiet you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business. What else should I be? Said the wizard. All the same, I am pleased to find you remembered something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly. At any rate, that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandmother Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna. Let me go back. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for. I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have, twice now, my pardon. I give it to you. In fact, I will go as far to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too. Very likely, if you ever get out of it, get over it. Sorry, I don't want any ventures. Thank you. Not today. Good morning. But please come to tea anytime you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye. With that, the hobbit turned and scuttled inside the round green door and shut it as quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizard. What on earth did I ask him to tea for? He said to himself. As he went to the pantry, he had only just had breakfast, but he thought of cake or two, or a drink something would do him good after this fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was standing outside the door and laughing long but quietly. After a while, he stepped up and with the spike of his staff scratched a queer sign on the hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode away just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he had escaped adventures very well. The next day, he almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well unless he put them down on his engagement tablet. Like this, Gandalf Tea Wednesday, yesterday, he had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time, there came a tremendous ring on the front doorbell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle and put out another cup saucer and an extra cake or two and ran to the door. I am so sorry to keep you waiting, he was going to say, when he saw that it was not Gandalf after all. It was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door opened, he pushed inside, just as if he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg and, "Dwavlin, at your service," he said with a low bow. "Bilbo Baggins at yours," said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, "I am just about to take tea. Pray come and have some with me." A little stiff perhaps, but he meant it kindly. "And what would you do if an unexpected dwarf came and hung his things up in your hall without a word of explanation?" Good question. That had not been a table. They had not been at the table long. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake when there came another, even louder ring at the bell. "Excuse me," said the hobbit, and off he went to the door. "So you have got here at last." That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the door opened, just if he has been invited. I see they have become to arrive already, he said when he caught sight of Joavlin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it, and Balin, at your service, he said with his hand on his breast. Thank you, said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they have begun to arrive had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as the host, he knew his duty and stuck to it, however painful he might have to go without. Come along in and have some tea, he managed to say after taking a deep breath. A little beer would suit me better if it's all the same to you, my good sir, said Balin with the white beard. But I don't mind some cake, seed cake, if you have any. Lots, Bilbo found himself answering as his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off, too, to the cellar to fill a pint beer mug, and then to the pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes, which he had baked that afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Drawling were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down with the beer and the cake in front of him, when loud came a ring at the bell again, and another ring. Gandalf for certain this time, he thought, as he puffed along the passage, but it was not. It was 2 more dwarfs, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. And they hopped as soon as the door began to open. Bilbo was harshly surprised at all. What can I do for you, my dwarves, he said. Kili at your service, said one, and Fili at your service, added another. And they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. At yours and your families, replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. Joavlin and Balin here already, I see, said Kili. Let us join the throng. Throng, thought Mr. Baggins. I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink. He had only just a sip in the corner, while the 4 dwarfs sat around the table and talked about mines and goals and troubles with goblins and the depredation, there we go, and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand, and he did not want to, for they sounded too much adventurous. When ding-dong-a-ling-dang, his bell rang again, and if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. As if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. Someone's at the door, he said, blinking. Some 4, I should say. Rather sound, said Fili. Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance. The poor little hobbit sat down in his hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened, and what was going to happen, and whether they would all stay for supper. Then the doorbell rang again, louder than ever, and he had to run off to the door. It was not 4 of them, it was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, at your service, one after another. Dori, Nori, Orin, Owen, and Glowin were all their names, and very soon 2 purple hoods, a gray hood, a brown hood, a white hood, were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, and some called for porter. I don't think I'm going to be finishing this chapter for this read. We got about 10 minutes left. It's a bit, but we're good. We're gonna keep going. Hopefully we can get to the song. So, for ale, and some for porter, and 1 for coffee, and all of them for cakes. So the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had been set in the hearth. The seedless cakes were gone, and the dwarfs were starting on the round of butter scones when they came. A loud knock, not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Something was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage very angry and altogether bewildered and bewildered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he had ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of another. More dwarves, four more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark that he had put there the morning before. Carefully, he said. It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat. And then opened the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Bilbo, Beaufort, Bomber, and especially Thorin. At your service, said Bilbo, Beaufort, and Bomber, standing in a row. Then they hung up their two yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. The last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf. In fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's map with Bilbo, Beaufort, and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very haughty and said nothing but about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. We're all here," said Gandalf, looking at the roll of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and apple tarts," said Beaufort. "And mince pies and cheese," said Beaufort. Okay. "And pork pie and salad," said Bomber. "And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarfs through the door. "Put on a few eggs. There's a good fellow." Gandalf called after him as the hobbit stumped off to the pantries. "And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles." "Seems to know as much about the inside of my launders as I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure was not come right into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on the big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. "Confuciate and bothered these dwarfs," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand?" Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Fili and Kili behind them. And before they could say knife, they had whisked the trays of a couple of small tables into the parlor and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the pantry with 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat at the stool at the fireside, nibbling on a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarfs ate and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose we will stay until supper," he said in his politest, unimpressing tones. "Of course," said Thorin, "and after we shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first." Now to clear up. Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balanced in columns of plates. Each whipped a bottle on the top with a hand while the hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking in fright. "Please be careful, and please don't tremble." "I can manage," but the dwarves only started to sing. "Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread the fat. For the milk on pantry floor, leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl. Pound them up with a tumbling pole, and when you finish, it's already whole. Send them down the hall to row. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates." And of course, they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe and quickly and lightly, while the hobbit was turning around and around in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the um fender, smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings. Whenever he told one to go, it went up to the chimney, or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round the ceiling. But whenever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent the smaller smoke ring from the historic clay pipe straight through each of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the Windsor's head. He had a cloud of them about him already, and in the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood up and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had spent up over the hill. Now for some music, said Thorin. Bring out the instruments. My allergies is really messing with me today. Killy and Philly rushed for their bags and brought back little fitties. Dory and Nori and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Beefer and Bofer went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among their walking sticks. Dwavlin and Ballin, excuse me, I left mine on the porch. Just bring mine in with you, said Thorin. They came back with viols as big as himself, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot anything else and was swept away into the dark lands under strange moons fall over the water, and very far from this hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and they still played on while the shadow of Gandalf's beard waggled against the wall. The dark filled room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and they still played on. And suddenly, first one and the other began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places in their ancient homes. And this was a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountains cold, the dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break the day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarfs of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells, in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient king and elvish lord, there many a gleaming gold a hoard. They shaped and wrought the light they caught, to hide the gems in hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung, the flower stars on crowns they hung. The dragon fire, a twisted wire, they meshed the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away or break the day, to claim our long forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man delves. There lay they long and made a song, wop song unheard by men or elves. The pines were whirring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red and flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragon's ear, more fierce than fire, lay low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon. The dwarfs, they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to die and fall beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, the dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away or break up the day, to win our harps of gold from him. That is deep. That is deep. That's something that needs to be broken down. Okay? As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands and by cunning and by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, a desire of the hearts of the dwarves. Then something tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out of dark sky above the trees. He thought the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. caverns. Suddenly in the wood behind the water, a flame leapt up. Probably someone lighting a wood fire. And he thought of the pondering dragon setting on his quiet hill and kindling it all the flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was playing Mr. Baggins of Bag End under the hill again. He got up trembling. He had less than a half mind to fetch the lamp, and more than a half mind to pretend to, and go out and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until all the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found himself that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in the tone that seemed that to show he suggests both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said all the dwarves. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat on a fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. Okay, let me finish this last passage. Gandalf, dwarfs, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair of his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale. He paused for breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was waggling his mouth in protest at being called audacious. And worst of all, fellow conspirator. Though no noise came out, he was so flummoxed. So Thorin went on. We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policy, and devices. We shall soon before the break of day start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, and perhaps all of us, except our friend and counselor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to all of us, to the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarves. I think I should be right by naming Killian Philly, for instance. The exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation. This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anything that was not known already. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't hear it any longer. "At may never return," he began to feel a shriek coming from inside, and very soon it burst out like a whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarves sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck the blue light on the end of the magic staff, and in the firework glare, the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearth rug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, struck by lightning, over and over again. And that was all he could get all of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out the way of the drawing room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and they went back to their dark business. "Excitable little feathers," said Gandalf, as they sat down again. "Gets funny, queer fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch. If you have ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you would realize that was only a poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great-grand-uncle Bull Rower, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham on the Battle of the Green Fields and knocked their king Gonfambior's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed hundreds of yards through the air and went off into the rabbit hill." Okay, so we're going to stop because I thought we was going to get to a nice closing, but it's not, because this chapter doesn't end for a while. Yeah, so I will probably wrap up this chapter, maybe record any moments that was like memorable. But thank you. This was my first reading. I will be doing them every week on Sundays. I'm not sure what time because my Sundays are pretty jam-packed, but I do want to share some good readings with you guys, and maybe start discussions or even like a book club in the future, because I love literature. But have a good start to your week. This is June 1st. It's the beginning of a fresh new month. Get your goals down. Stay on your Zoom. Stay focused. And I'll see you soon.